we've got 3 separate sections of this workshop that will address each of these little areas. We've got an audience, we've got 5 key speakers here at the front for us, and we'll ask a question from us already, and then we'll take a couple of questions from the audience on each section, if that's okay. So I'll just let all the speakers introduce themselves.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Andy Thornley from the British Insurance Brokers Association. I'm Head of Corporate Affairs, so I'm the link between our members and their views and their issues and the policy that we form, and then government. Brokers are a key part of this sort of conversation because between insurers and the client, brokers usually sit, and 78% of commercial lines insurance goes through brokers, 54% of all general insurance, so the biggest distribution channel in that regard, so we'll play a key role in educating customers but also facilitating any solution within the industry.
Alan Cripps from the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. I'm a Chartered Surveyor. I'm also a Chartered Loss Adjuster. I look after building surveyors at the Royal Institution, so flooding is a passion of mine and high up my agenda, and I'm very keen that we get some training put in hand.
I'm Alistair Mosley. I'm Honorary Vice President of the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management. That's a mouthful. So that's why we say CIWEM, much easier. CIWEM has about 5,000 members that would work in the area of flood and flood risk management, and we're very interested in the role that property level protection has to play in the wider flood resilience portfolio, and we have in our own way run a round table event which fortunately mirrors exactly what BRE have been doing, and so we're very much in tune with this initiative and very keen to support it.
Good. For the third time today. I'm Graham Brogden, so I think I've done enough introduction through the day, but obviously very, very supportive of this for a number of reasons.
And I'm Elaine Toogood, who you haven't heard of, except I have been asking lots of questions. I'm architect with the Concrete Centre, which is part of MPA, which is the Mineral Products Association. And we are responsible, we provide guidance and with relation to the construction industry, basically, with the use of concrete and masonry products. We organise events such as this, which is, everybody's been, I don't know if it's come through, that actually anybody who attends today gets a discount if they wanted to come along on Thursday. Actually, the remit is very similar to the forum that's been run in February. So it's giving, and obviously masonry and concrete have a key role to play within our flood resilience and resistance measures, which term do we use? And I've been tasked, and somehow I am responsible for updating our flooding guidance. So there's some current guidance outside that needs to be updated, and I'm in the process of doing that, as well as some key issues related to retrofit, as in putting in new concrete floors in flooded properties.
Thanks, panel. My name's Elliot Beevy. I work at the Centre for Resilience in Scotland, and we're going to break this discussion down into 3 sections. So if I kick us off with standards, and I'll direct this to whoever wants to answer first, and then we can get a bit of a discussion flowing. So the action plan has identified current standards and where gaps are thought to exist. Is there anything that you think the roundtable has missed, and what do you think is essential to address as a priority that the action plan has covered?
Everyone's looking at me, so I might as well kick off. First of all, I think that the roundtable and the subsequent report, which hopefully everyone's got a copy of, was a really, really good piece of work. I think it's a fantastic example of third sector, public sector and private sector coming together, and the work has been very thorough. Because we've been a part of it, I'm going to say no, I don't think it's missed anything. I think in terms of the importance of standards, certainly from the insurance industry point of view, it's incredibly important to know that if property level protection is put in, first of all, the type of property level protection achieves a certain standard. Secondly, the standard of installation is correct. And then thirdly, maintenance, if there is any maintenance required. That's incredibly important to ensure that the resilience or resistance properties of that are sustained, and that any loss is either mitigated or reduced to a level where it's acceptable for the underwriter. So it's incredibly important. The insurance industry obviously will contribute towards that, but I don't think would necessarily own that piece of work to do the standards. That's more for my colleagues at people like Rick's or or other organisations, but certainly we'd want to be a key part of that negotiation with our colleagues at the ABI as well to help shape that and to ensure that sort of any standards produced are fit for purpose and can be used to get people discounts on their premiums or deductibles for their insurance policy.
Thank you. Anyone else on the back?
Well, I was just going to say, I think I agree. I think we've covered most of the things standard-wise. I think the thing that I always look at is, I think, and I was talking to Paul earlier on, we should be looking at flooding holistically, not just, we've been talking about the house generally today, which, if you're looking at it holistically, right at the top, working your way down. So I think somehow within our standards, we need to get that in there, because I think otherwise we're going to miss a trick. We're never going to stop flooding, but by removing trees from riverbanks that like to fall in and block a bridge or all that sort of stuff upstream, will save the flow of the water, slow the flow of the water coming downstream. So by the time it gets to the house, hopefully it's a lot less, and then some of the products won't be overtopped and will work. So I just think we need to keep that in our mind, because unless you do something upstream, you're not going to really change what we've already got downstream.
Yeah.
So that's where I was going to go actually. When after you started, if there was anything missing at all, it's just that upstream assessment of whether is it appropriate in the whole context of what's going to be applied.
Yeah.
I think whether that actually comes into part of the standard itself is probably questionable, but it just needs to be recognised. And the other thing that from the bit of work we've done at CIWEM and talking to the ICE and hopefully in the future with Alan at RICS as well, is thinking more in terms of maybe a code of practice rather than standards, under which standards then thrive. So that you can have it's a bit, the concrete world has this, doesn't it? You have codes of practice for concrete work that is underpinned by specific standards for a particular need. And I think that's quite a powerful model. And the other thing that we're really keen to do is to make the process as easy as possible. So, wherever we can, adapt what we already have so that we just tweak it with things that people recognise, that are joined up, and then overall the insurers can be confident at the end, and the practitioners can be confident, and the people, the investors can be, the householder or the organisations. So that's how our thinking is going. We're very much in tune with this great document. We're very pleased with this.
I would say, just very quickly, the only thing that we've missed is some of all the experience that's out there, and that's what we want to do. We've done it with a small group at the moment and pulled it together to where it is now. What we want to do is, and I've said it before today, is pull in all the rich work that's going on outside of the round table at the moment, get that into the round table to make sure that we're all joined up and we can deliver on it. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was a fantastic thing to be part of, and I think there's a great momentum, I think, coming through. I think, as you say, this has been talked about for a long time. I haven't been talking about it for a long time. Some people have, but there does seem to be a momentum of people discussing it. The thing I think might be the only thing, having thought a lot more about it afterwards, and is that we've talked about wanting to embed it within regulation, and I think it's the right thing possible to end up as. We all know that what are the chances and how long is that going to take. I think actually prioritising how we need to get the current planning application process working better as an approval and a means of control, because that at the moment is the gateway. They're the gatekeepers of saying whether something should be for resident or not. And actually there needs to be more joined up thinking with how that actually operates in terms of making sure that small developments or large developments in areas of flood risk are actually don't just tick a box, they actually do something about it.
Thank you. Would anyone like to follow up any of those points?
Several of them.
Yeah.
Sorry. Agreed in time, that's what our conference is about in February. Basically asking the question, what's the evidence that current planning policy is being delivered? Question mark, because there isn't any, or very little. Secondly, I think the holistic point you make is very important, and that's where I see the flood risk assessor's role as being critical, because they should understand, they should have the skills to be able to understand what is being planned elsewhere and where, if you like, any measures on an individual property or a group of properties should come in. Because what you don't want to do is start doing things that go directly contrary to something else that is planned 2 years down the road, for example. I think the overarching approach is really critical, but I think that code of conduct or accreditation or whatever we want to see it, needs to be a systems-based approach. So, and that needs to be viewed from two perspectives. One is an underwriter's perspective, perhaps claims managers, I don't know, but the second one is from the householder's perspective. So it's got to deliver for both those groups.
Yeah, to give you a snapshot of where we are at the moment, as an annex to this report, we did a survey with all members, and 90 different insurance firms responded and gave their view. One of the questions was around current application of standards. Do any panel of insurers ask for any standards when it comes to resilience measures? 95% of respondents said no. So it gives you a snapshot of where we are. Okay, it's a low starting point, but it means that, you know, sort of we can improve quite a lot in a short period of time, hopefully, once we start generating those standards. So, you know, I'm not necessarily disheartened by that, because I think, you know, sort of that we can make a big difference in a short period of time just with small steps. So, yeah, I'm feeling confident that we can do something as a group, following, you know, sort of the work and the collaboration which has gone into this so far.
Make one further point, which is you raised the point about a lot's already going out there, and I think in each one of your sections there's an action to collect what's already going on out there and to enhance what's
Absolutely.
already out there.
Yeah.
Because
It's
if I
something
get,
we were looking at,
Yeah.
because we
That's our
recognise
next
there's a
meeting.
number of things going on. And we also didn't want to suggest that we were going to be the authority, and that was
yeah,
just
no,
pointless.
no,
Because there is so much.
but
that's going on.
I'm aware of probably something in every single category
Yeah.
that's
Mm.
going on. And what we need to do is build on that infrastructure
Yeah.
and make that work in a more effective way.
No, totally agree, and the groups will expand based on that. And our next meeting is actually to try and identify all those areas around where people are working and make sure we capture them all. And today's been a great help because we've heard a lot of it. So.
Just quick points to make on the code of practices and the sort of standards. There's lots of levels of it. You know, the customer needs to know sort of an ABC of what's required to get their house resilient. So, in other words, you know, they need to know the flood risk. They need the right qualified person to assess their property. They need the installation and the guarantee. That's really simple, isn't it? They need something like that. But in the background, the insurers have got to sign up to that making a difference to the premium. And the standards below that have got to be really good. So actually there's all the products. So there's levels and layers, I think, of regulation and process. And we just need to look at it so that somebody can pick it out and say, for that type of house, yeah, I need policy, or the customer goes, I need this. Insurers say, I recognise this. And it's just got, it's like a little spider diagram. We've got to say that interested party, they've got it. And I think we're not that far away from that. It's more like bringing that together, I think, rather than there is a requirement for standards per se, but some of that's been done to some degree in some areas. We just need to bring that into the story. Yeah, it does, yeah, absolutely. And treat it like the customer, because none of this is any use unless someone does it. And the only reason they're going to do it ultimately is if a customer feels, as we've described a lot today, that it's in their interest, be it a housing association or individual, which then moves into these other areas, doesn't it? So I think you're right. If we look at it from the end user perspective, and then check that all the parties that are relevant to that end user, it ticks the boxes for them. I think then we've probably got something that will really work.
But you just switched between two words, customer and end user, and the two aren't necessarily the same. And the problem is that it's very difficult to engage end users, because if people move on average every 5 years, their investment in resilience is dependent on knowing that it will come back in the resale value of the house, or to make the house sellable, or there's a whole range of other issues. Whereas if you're talking about vulnerable end users, then the customer will be the local authority or the housing association that's housing them, or the customer might be a builder who wants to build innovatively and sustainably. I think that there's a real problem in that distinction between customers and end users.
Well, there's layers, aren't there? And there's levels of customer, so end users. Because you'd say for Innovative Housing Association, then they've got this different perspective on the long term. SME's got a different problem, you know, and we've looked at that, haven't we? And the round table was complete. You think, crikey, that's a completely separate set of thoughts. They're thinking a completely different way. So actually the story isn't one story, is it?
No.
We talk about it's 3 or 4, so we've got to break it down again. Then you realise why it's not yet been done.
Yeah, in the SME space, absolutely. You've got to. We had, even in the last event, we had the business owner that wanted resilience put in, and the landlord of the building just wanted it done. Didn't want to hold anything up, just wanted it done. And you get this conflict where the business owner wants to protect their business and become resilient, and the landlord just wants the building up and running as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I get, strangely, talking about Australia earlier, I get 2 phone calls off my niece. They're either at risk of being burnt or they're at risk of being flooded out. And she phoned me up about 8 weeks ago, and they live at Gora, just off the Barossa Valley. And she said it has been exceptionally bad this year. But she said they've got so many pumps out now, it's causing problems for people that have never had the problem before, because everyone's moved the problem downstream in theory. And she said even it's caught the local authorities out, because where they planned for flooding, it no longer floods because everyone's prepared for it to push it somewhere else. And I said, but you know, if they saved the wine, and she said, oh yeah, they so, but they seem to have an end receiver problem at the moment. It's they'll get their act together, but they'll move it on to someone else. And secondly, the other thing that I've noticed, obviously we're seeing in the press a lot more about sinkholes and things like that. This sort of effect, is that going to affect that? Are we going to hear more of it if it's pushed in the wrong direction? That's a question.
That's why you need that flood risk assessor, and why you need to be managing that water from the point where it hits the ground.
Right,
okay. So you know what it is you're trying to do on an area base. So you know where to hold it up, and you know where to speed it through.
And that's a blend of experience and modelling. It's using technology and historical local knowledge, isn't it? That's why the community involvement is so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Every single technique under the sun. And there are dozens.
Yeah.
We've been talking about property stuff today, but there are dozens and dozens and dozens of techniques for managing water. And we just need to be aware of that.
Thank you. So one more question on standards, and then we'll move on to certification.
Yeah. My role is more about the intersection right up to the planning stage of the development rather than perhaps the project stage. And there are conflicts in standards, so we would look at intersection where the water lands. So that could be roof level or podium level, not necessarily at basement level. So it's really important to slow that down through modelling and to use that with green, blue, yellow roofs or living roofs together. So you use natural vegetation, you use products, you slow the water down. But in that area, the standards, there are no standards for green roofs, they are, but for living roofs, there are no standards against waterproofing and best design guides. So it's something at the moment we're talking to NHBC, LABC regarding how we set some key pointers in terms of design. What are the key things you should be looking at, and how do you involve all the different disciplines? Because it will involve public health engineers, it will involve ICE with consultant engineers. It involves landscape architects as well in the total holistic design, and this is really a new area rather than going from one person's responsibility to a number of people, and each one has a responsibility as it passes on to highlight the impact to the next person. So there is a gap in standards in that area as well.
That's a good point.
Any quick responses from the panel? Or should we?
I just think that's all about competence, because if I was doing that, I would do exactly what you just said. I'll go to the IC, so I think it's all about knowing your limit and the competence. So I think you're right. That needs to be taken into account. So good point.
I think it's also taking a whole catchment view on flooding rather than just trying to take it out and trying to solve it on its own. And there's still a lot of work to be done, isn't there, as you just said. So I mean, that's all within the sort of sustainable drainage spectrum, isn't it? An integrated water management spectrum. So.
Thank you. So if we move on to certification, we've mentioned SMEs quite a few times today. So the flood resilience sector and much of the construction industry is made up of SMEs, but investing in certification can be seen as very expensive. What incentives or regulatory controls are needed in this area to boost certification as a whole?
Well, if I can speak with another hat on, because I'm a director of the Future Water Association, and we represent SMEs, lots of SMEs working particularly in the water sector, maybe water industry. And my experience of those types of organisations is that they want the confidence of the standard to work to. They don't like going into an environment where there's a risk that they'll do something and it won't work, maybe through no fault of their own. That's the whole point, really. And I actually think the SMEs, by and large, will welcome it, so long as they aren't burdened, with too much cost. And if it's just working to a standard that somebody else has written, then I would have thought that was a no-brainer. But
I think it needs to go a bit farther than that. I've been on so many of these round tables, and the question always gets asked, when are we going to do some training? Well, my view is, why should you guys have to pay for something if there's nothing guaranteed at the end of it? So I think the mortgage lenders, insurers, need to kind of mandate something, or the government needs to say that we need this person. I mean, the ABI are very supportive of what we're trying to do, but I think if it was regulated, or somebody said, every time you buy or sell a house, you need a flood risk assessment. That's a very small bit, but at least then people know there's a means to an end. They're not going to spend whatever on a course and not get something at the end of it. I've sort of argued that for the last few years, but at the last round table, it kind of was wearing a bit thin, and somebody said, what are you going to do about it? So we are looking at it, but obviously it's important that, if we put on a training session, it costs money, that people know there's something at the end of it.
So do you mean, Alan, that as part of, as a flood risk assessment, you mean that the house or the property is assessed for flood resilience as part of the survey?
But I think I would look at all of it, really. We were just saying that, Paul was saying, we're looking at everything, not just one little bit, because you can't really do that.
And I think there's a real market opportunity, because if we look at the National Flood Resilience Review, and we look at the emphasis on critical infrastructure, the skills that those flood risk assessors are going to need are exactly the skills that are going to be needed to deliver that against critical infrastructure. So I think the market's quite big, actually.
Yeah.
It's a question of
somebody saying there's a need. That's my thing. Yeah. I'm looking at the moment with the BRE putting something together, but it's quite difficult because even my lot at the RSS now is starting to sort of think, well, is that going to work? Is there a need for it? Because flooding comes and goes so much. That's the trouble. It's here one minute and gone the next. Even though there's work for the next 12 months, for the surveyors, I've been trying to say to them for years that there's work there. When I was adjusting, I knew, I employed surveyors to do it, so I know it happens. But I just think it does. My view is, anyway, I've always said it needs to be a mandate from somebody to say we need this, and as soon as somebody says we need it, then everybody will do it because they will see an income at the end of it.
I think we've said that one of the things is we need to raise awareness. We need to really raise awareness around resilience, and I think as we do that, and as we do that through the action plan and other works that are going on, then that need for someone to be certified to do that will naturally come off the back of it. At the moment, you can't see that. You can't see that there's a need for it because people are just not aware. You go out to businesses, you talk about flood risk, you go out to people and talk about flood risks, and the lack of awareness is just staggering, really. Even if you live in a flood risk area, you don't know it. So as you pick that up and raise that up, then I think the market will get big, as you said, Paul.
I think that we need to understand where the points of contact are for an individual, be they a household or a small business. You think about it, it's when they get insurance, when they buy a property.
Absolutely.
There aren't many points of contact, and it's therefore the ones that we've got we need to make the most of. And that's why insurance. That's one of the reasons why 5 years ago we picked insurance as being one of the key elements because it's one of the key points of contact. And as I said, there aren't many. We can build other points of contact, things like council tax, for example, there's an opportunity and so on, but it's really quite difficult to get that engagement unless it's already in there.
It is.
I totally agree with everything that everyone said, but just to counter it with sometimes commercial pressures that happen. So if you're, for example, an insurance provider and you're the person that's holding up the sale, that person just wants to buy the house, wants to move the stuff in, wants to redecorate the terrible aubergine coloured kitchen, whatever it is, And if you're the person holding that up, all of a sudden there's then a tension. And if someone else can come in and not hold it up and just sweep it through, then sort of you're at a commercial disadvantage. So there is also that sort of extra pressure that's happening, and sort of insurance providers will feel that. Mortgage lenders will also feel that. It requires an approach from a collective approach, in my opinion, to try and make sure that sort of that pressure is reduced as much as possible, so that we can get this through. Quite what the answer is, I don't have that right here and now. But if we can identify the challenges, then we can try and overcome those.
That's kind of where the concept of a code comes from, isn't it? It's whether you make that mandatory or just best practice is the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
I wonder with the issue of the training whether there's been a few people burnt by the Green Deal, and I wonder if actually has that been a work stream in terms of lessons learned from that, in terms of what could be done better? Or, I know there's some other unforeseen circumstances that happened there, but I can imagine there's going to be a lot of crossover. The sorts of people who did that training, who might be the sort of people who would be the people to do training for flood risk assessment.
I'm not sure that'd be the same. The reason being that a lot of the people who were doing the household assessments weren't that skilled to start with. Whereas what we're asking for is people who've already got some sort of a qualification, already have a professional standing in some shape or form, be it Solwyn, Ricks or whoever.
They should be
we're
Ricks,
asking them to upskill.
So it wasn't surveyors that were picking that up?
There were a lot of people who...
Was it some?
Okay. Some, but a lot of people who had very little, if any, qualifications.
Right.
And it was sold to them. They paid 200 quid or whatever the number was to go on a training course, and lo and behold, 9 hours later they could come out and do an energy assessment on a house, which basically involved walking around and saying, oh, you have got a window. So this is... I understand the point.
So this is a higher level of technical competence, this, isn't it? That we're talking about here.
Yes. I know there's no one sort of commercial within the flood protection industry on the panel, but the one outstanding sort of accreditation within the sector is PAS 1188. There's been very little investment from industry participants in this particular standard, which is always held as being quite prominent. And the main reasons for that is the way that products are procured. And whilst we talk about a standard, we either don't specify it, or we might specify it, but we don't check that people have it. I'm not sure if anyone's actually done any studies on repair and renew grants, which were based on original guidance from government that said they should be accredited. My suspicion is that the last round of the majority of the products installed were non-kite marked, in which case the business case for companies investing in certification, whether it be products or services, is actually very, very low until the buying community actually has the confidence in the standards. And I personally don't think you can have the confidence in the standards until there's a lot more basic research and scientific understanding of the way that buildings will perform in flooding.
Sorry to add to that. I think one of the fundamental problems is also the difficulty actually finding out whether a product does meet a standard. If you go on to the BS Standards website, it is a job. It's really difficult. We try and guide people from our website, but unless you are very persistent, you will not get an answer. And so there's another bit there that's...
So it's a standard that's possibly not easy to understand.
It's
or even get to...
It's not designed for a member of the public to be able to go in and use.
And I think
it's designed to be abused.
It's a standard for products, isn't it, as I understand it?
Well,
so actually, whereas a lot of the measures that we're talking about, like the repointing of brickwork and things like that, wouldn't be covered by something like that, and yet they're a really good thing to do. So it's, but is it the right mortar that you've used, and what are the bricks like? So there's actually building materials. Obviously, I would mention that a bit, but it is the whole house approach, which. So actually, what we're talking about is all of these things need to be timeless.
But part of it is being able to say, so for example, we're just redoing our blue pages, which is the directory, and we're specifying that the advertisers must put on their website certificates for each of the products that they are claiming that they've got kite marked. Oh boy, is that difficult. It is, the interesting discussions we've had they've taken several months. And to check it means that you've got to go in for each product separately, all the way through the BS Standards website, and double check. It will take you weeks, weeks and weeks.
There's an analogy there with the responsible sourcing, I think, which is another standard. Where so we within the concrete industry, we weren't talking about responsible sourcing and saying people need to do it until there was a critical mass of people who actually had got the standard, because otherwise people would just be spending all the time looking at different things, and it became. But it's still a challenge to be able to work out whether something actually has that mark. But the key is the website. So actually, if you can just go and it says there's a page and you link to it and it says all materials made by us is covered.
Yep.
Actually, that gives you the confidence to know. So I think you're absolutely right. And I think there is, again, it's the lessons learned from similar issues for how it can feed into it.
Absolutely
I think is another strand of how we can resolve it. So it's not directly what people are doing, but what else have people done in a similar sort of situation that we can learn from, I think.
Yeah, the other point I was going to make was the problem you've got is you've got one person saying, do I want a flood door? Yeah. And can I find out one that might be suitable? And they believe, and they're happy just to take a risk, but that's the right thing to do. Up to proper resilience, by which I mean a more holistic approach to the building. I think the only way you're going to do that is you've got to get a suitably qualified person to take responsibility for advising that person on what to do in their house. So you sue them, yeah? So I've got this surveyor bloke in, or lady in, and I'm going to sue them if they get it wrong. And they've got a professional body, or they've got someone that's going to take action against them. So that's what you do. You go to the doctor, you don't get a pill, do you, and go, sounds like it's for my symptoms, not sure about my body and whether it's the right thing, I'll just pop it anyway. And that's for this sort of thing, isn't it? It's a solution. Yeah. Whereas you go to the doctor and say, well, based upon your illness and your specific circumstances, I would take this approach. And you trust them, don't you? Exactly. And that's what. And unfortunately, the problem with that is it comes at a cost. That's the thing I don't really struggle with, because if you've got I'm saying surveyors because they'd be a sort of key person probably do this, but you've got to understand the building, you've got to understand flood risk, you've got to understand the empathy in the person, and you've got to spend a lot of time talking and winning them over, discussing. Now that is a lot of skills in one person, and therefore it ain't going to be cheap. So the other thing I think is how we're going to fund it, and the other way to fund it is if most of the time insurers or a council will be happy to pay that, if they knew that it was going to result in a long-term saving to them over portfolio properties. So it has to come at a cost, and I think perhaps we need to think about not thinking that this is going to be cheap, because if it's cheap, then it will be done badly, and then everyone won't believe it, and then 20 years' time they go, that resilience thing, let's try it again, it didn't work last time.
And that's where a lot of the argument has been with DEFRA, who've wanted to send this through on the cheap. Okay, and so we have a report that says to specify what a flood risk assessor should do. Just got to do it. We have an understanding of what the cost is. Broadly speaking, it's £500 a property. We know that because that's yeah. Broadly speaking, we know all the bits are in place, but the difficulty has been saying, well, actually, this isn't cheap. This isn't something that you can go down to your local estate agent and you'll come along and ticket for £90, which was what the energy code stuff was about. This is actually a proper skilled piece of work.
But there's also the risk issue, and I mean, you're touching on, I think, some of the problems we've experienced in talking to some of the local authorities. They are so risk averse. They don't want to administer the grant because, I don't think that's being too dramatic. I don't think the local authorities want to administer the grants because they're worried that if something goes wrong in the next flood, the finger's going to be pointed at them. So they want to use their own surveyors to do this surveying because they want to be absolutely certain that the advice given is something that
That's
they're happy
fine
to
if they're
sign
a
up
certain
with.
standard.
However, well, yeah, that's right. But however, they're finding that they don't have surveyors in-house to do the work, so they don't really want to trust external surveyors because then it's out of their control, sort of thing. So I think it is. I mean, in terms of the grants and what we've observed with the local authorities, there's still some real
There's lots of issues with
fundamental
that
issues
grant,
around that. Yeah.
which need to be rewritten.
Can I just throw something else into the mix here, which may have Alan might start jumping up and down, and I should as a professional. Most professionals giving professional advice have to carry professional indemnity. So, but they can only do that if they're working within a practice that's well understood. So if we are fortunate enough to agree and develop standards and codes of practice over time that professionals can then give advice on based on those, then in theory some of the risk will get offset onto the professionals. That will drive the cost of the service they provide up slightly, but it will ultimately hopefully impact on lower premiums for properties, because you will have a course of action if something, for whatever happens, that isn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not my area, but it's something that's been brought up in the discussions I've been part of, and I think if that gets overlooked, because at the moment this is not a space occupied by working professionals in the phrase that we know and understand it.
No, it's not.
There's a few individuals
Yeah.
who are doing this properly, and who have got multiple skill sets, and they are insured through their companies.
And they're sure that they're companies, and that's
But
what
then
has
we
to
are
be.
talking about a small number of individuals.
Just talking about the original cost and if insurance companies could pick up the tab for that. Now, we don't represent insurers, so I wouldn't profess to do the ABI's work for them. But if it's anything like Betterment, what happens is or the industry argument is that if you invest and expect the rest of the portfolio to pick up the benefit of that, there's things nowadays called price comparison websites that actively encourage churn through the market, and one of the fears with that is that any investment that you put in is actually realised by somebody else. Now, I think there potentially is an argument to look at it over a portfolio basis, but it's really difficult at the moment to get over that, sort of aspect of churn and where that investment that you put actually sits. So I work for insurer A, and then insurer B picks it up at renewal, then insurer B gets all of the gain for it, and sort of you get nothing apart from a big bill.
There is one opportunity, I think, which is through Flood Re. If through Flood Re we go in now and say, actually, we want to ensure that 70% of the properties assigned to Flood Re are properly surveyed, and there's an opportunity to look at whatever measures can be applied. That creates the market. That create, you've got to do it against the standard. It makes financial savings for Flood Re, so it's financially viable. In fact, they should be doing it. Okay, and there's an opportunity there.
And
on the residential side.
I think you will find that, well, I know you will find that Flood Re want to explore that avenue. I was with them yesterday, actually. And absolutely, just finding that right mechanism and understanding how much you put in. But the one thing, I mean, you're right, and when you talk about betterment and everything else, there's so many products coming up, not the resistance products, the barriers and that, but in resilience world, there's so many products coming on the market now, it doesn't have to be that much more expensive. You're ripping a building out, as we've seen earlier, and the amount of stuff that you're taking out, there's products that you can put back that will be more resilient at neutral cost. So
it's how we characterise that and standardise that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely on that side. But you can do it. It doesn't have to be overly expensive.
Thank you, gentlemen in the red. My name's Matt Cheese and I work for the RSK Group, and I suppose I'll describe myself as a flood risk assessor. One thing that worries me listening to this is the level of resilience. I think there's been some fantastic ideas banding around today, discussed at length about what we can do, and the actual people side of things has fascinated me as well, to actually really pick up on what you said, Paul, and what Mary elaborated on, and also you, Graham. And I think I'm sitting here as a consultant thinking flood risk assessment in itself is a bit of a minefield. The Environment Agency in February of this year kind of threw a little bit of a cat amongst the pigeons with the revised climate change analysis. we were all very happily sort of using 20% as our climate change allowance for fluvial flooding. Just to pick one example, I'm aware that it's the whole range we need to consider. But now we're looking at anywhere between 5% and 105%. So how on earth, and I'd be really interested to get the insurance industry's thoughts on this, how on earth are we supposed to advise and critically sign our names to a document that we're not going to get sued for because it's, the PI just won't stand up? How are we supposed to advise on that? Because the 100-year climate change flood event, whether it's a 5% allowance or 105% allowance, it might not be enough. Carlisle was protected to a 200-year climate change standard by the defences that were only completed 2 or 3 years ago. That flood, December last year, was tentatively, don't quote me on this if I'm on camera, about 1 in 300 year. They overtopped due to a combination of factors. So you've got hundreds of people in properties and businesses in Carlisle in a very difficult position. And as has already been mentioned, I was up there in September looking at a particular client's property, skips up and down the roads. So how do we advise on that level of resistance, and how are we sure that it's adequate and appropriate?
It's a really difficult one. I remember watching a news report at the time, and this guy said, they told us it was 1 in 75 year flood, and or 1 in 30 year or some, I forget what the likelihood was. And he said, and it hasn't flooded in any of that time, and it's flooded now, so the Environment Agency were lying to us. So there's an absolute lack of understanding about what that means.
It's confusing.
You can turn that around and make it
Confusing for us
simpler.
all.
You can say, if you're doing property level protection, actually the standard allows you to protect up to 900 mil on annual type of property. Therefore, your level of property protection is only going to do that. So you can only say that it's up to 900 mil. Okay? You can say, I've identified all the places where the water could get in. I've identified whether it's groundwater, surface water, etc. And these are the mitigation measures I've put in place. So have I put pumps in? Have I specified all cable entries and so on and so forth? And you can put a number on residual risk, but actually that number is only valid for today. Because next year that residual risk may be calculated as being higher. But even if it was, you still couldn't build your property level protection any higher than 900 mil. Yeah? It's not removing the risk, it's dealing with part of the risk.
And then you're into the speed of recovery and getting the building back into operation, aren't you? Which is why both you and Mary had that in your presentations, didn't you? About we have to accept that we can only protect to a certain level. And that's a professional. As long as that's an accepted way forward in a code that the country signs up to, then we're fine, aren't we? As long as we've done that.
I don't think as an insurer that we are unrealistic enough to understand that when you get a risk survey done, that it's going to stop anything that happens to that building and you're going to cover it. I think what concerns me is the amount of people that when something like this happens automatically then become flood risk assessors, and they all come out the woodwork all over the place. And I will tell you a very quick story about that, and what is more of a concern is when we were up in Cumbria, and once the Berg unit went up there and we were spending time in there speaking, we had a customer come into that Berg unit to say, I've had someone come and knock on my door and do me a risk survey. Can you just check that it's okay? But I have paid for it. Now how do I get that into a grant? So someone's knocked on their door, charged them £300, which they paid because they understood that they could get their survey fee back, produced them a document, brought it into the cabin where we were, we looked through it, and they said all they've done is printed off the guidelines that were on the DEFRA website, giving you them and charged £300. Wouldn't have got through a grant application at all. So as an insurer, we just want to see that gone. But any level of, we know that sometimes you'll put level protection in and it won't protect it, and ultimately people will sell the house 2 months after you've done it and put all the resilience in. Someone will come in and strip it all out because they don't want tile floors and different kitchens and everything else. So that's going to happen. But we need to stop that behaviour where people just see an opportunity, the opportunities come into areas and start getting money off it. And I think the standards, the certification and everything else can only help to take that on that journey. But it'll be a long journey.
I think one of the things your question raises that we have is that we've said today how the awareness is important and knowing your risk is important. I think the terminology and the way in which that's analysed, how it's understood by the community, and how it's reported and planned for in all of these things need to be completely joined up. Because we're all talking, you know, what does 1 in 75 mean? What does 1 in 100? What does 1 in 200? Is that zone 1? Is that zone 2? Is that zone 3? What does that mean? And actually, unless we've got to get it into terms of describing flood risk that everybody can understand.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we haven't got half a chance of anybody even doing anything about it. Because they will just assume, well, it hasn't happened, you know, is it going to happen next, you know, 1 in 100, I'll take that risk. 1 in 200, I'll take that risk. You know, because people will make that assumption based on misinformation, misunderstanding.
Yeah, there's a project called ScienceWise which looked into that in depth and has made some recommendations that are going into environment agencies for warnings and risks at the moment.
Great. So that should already be shared with everybody who's talking about it today.
Well, it's in work in progress. But the other bit of it, I think, is I quite like the phrasing of things in terms of somebody's mortgage. So if I have a mortgage, I'm in a house or whatever, what's the reality in terms of my level of risk? Am I like, you know, what's the chance of being flooded over that period of a mortgage? Because I think it needs, or maybe something different, but it needs to be turned into a language that people will automatically engage with. So even percentages and so on, it doesn't mean a lot. So on the other side, we'll talk about Flood RE and our level of ambition. That's why I like turning it into Flood RE, because it immediately encapsulates what our level of ambition is. And I don't think as a country we've set our ambition. And I think that's one of the problems in terms of actually stepping up to the plate, because we don't know what the plate is.
I think
can I just ask? We're starting to run out of time, so I just ask for one more, or if you want to go, and then one more question.
It was just really quick. We need to also set expectations as well, so that if someone puts PLP in place, it's not going to stop all the water. Some people believe that it will do. Get surprised when it happens. That's no good for anyone. And also, continue to read Daily Mail articles. It's tend to be around. It's been 3 months since I was flooded, and I'm still not back in my home. Which, you know, sort of, okay, there's new drying techniques and stuff like that, but, you know, sort of it's not unreasonable. So around just setting expectations as to what the experience might be, and that's something that I think we can all play a role in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. So any more questions about skills? Just one more? Or otherwise we'll start to wrap it up. Okay, thanks very much. That was a really fruitful discussion, I think. I really appreciate everyone taking part. Would you like to summarise anything, Graham?
Just close down once you finish the evening. No, nothing on that subject. No, that was excellent. Thanks, guys.